Let's get right into how I built this super fun mini camper. It features 50s inspired style, solar power, a screened-in back porch, and can even haul a motorcycle, unlike most small campers. This build began by prepping this 6x12 trailer. I removed the side rails, deck boards, and fenders. Here I'm using PVC sheet as a moisture barrier. Screen was installed for the porch deck to keep the bugs out and let the water drain. I reused the deck boards, but first I cut a section out of the forward side to save a little weight while keeping the joist spacing at about 14 inches. They were secured to the trailer with Tex self-drilling wood to metal screws, which seemed a lot more sturdy than the ones I took out. When those were on, I spent a good while under the trailer attaching the PVC sheets using roofing screws with rubber washers. Spray foam took care of the gaps and 1.5 inch insulation was installed. Stapling the screen finished off the underwork for now. At this point I leveled the trailer. I hadn't done it yet because I thought I could flip it and do the underwork, but alas, I wasn't strong enough. The bare trailer with wheels is over 500 pounds. This is 1/2 inch plywood. Most of the footage of installing screws, nails, or making cuts is left out for video efficiency and to respect your time. I certainly used far more hardware and fasteners than I will show in this abbreviated but full build video.
Good job, buddy.
The walls were framed with 1.5 by 1.5 studs ripped down with the table saw. Once I had a bunch cut, I prepped the top of each stud with this pocket hole jig. Thanks to the commenter from my last video who recommended it. The top of each wall was connected using the pocket hole style screws, as it's better to screw into wood in that direction than screwing into the end of a stud. I'm marking and cutting the front curved wall to be framed. Since it's curved at the top and bottom, it has to be framed a little differently. When I had one cut, I traced it and made another. Here I'm screwing the walls to the trailer frame, and later I'll add brackets and bolts. The bottom plates were attached, and I could now add the rear entry wall. For the front curve, I added horizontal cross members. The roof framing was also 1.5 joists using 2 pocket hole screws on either end. I sheeted the rear entry wall with 1/2 inch plywood. Here I'm marking and cutting the rear entry door. I chose to add a lot of curves to this build, which really slowed things down, but looks great in the end. The rear was framed with 1 inch by 1 inch treated lumber, as I was trying to save a little weight. In hindsight, I would have just used a consistent size, but still framed with treated lumber for this area. I temporarily tacked it up, then took it down to cut it. Traced that cut and made 2 identical sections. I added a couple 2x4s on each end to sturdy things up, a bottom piece for the door jamb, and began this laminated rear curve. I'd never done anything like this before. Lots of glue and patience resulted in exactly what I was after. It would have been way easier to just bring the rear curve straight down, but I'm too dang hard-headed for that once the idea hits my brain. While that dried, I went to the front and settled on a width for the window and added some blocking. Here at the kitchen, the windows were framed in, and on the other side, 5 contiguous windows were framed in. I added this 1/2-inch plywood to help the front end with sturdiness. I figured it couldn't hurt. The bottom of the wall is curved too, so framing traditionally here seemed like not the thing to do, though I did consider it. Out back, I finally added the door jamb. This took me quite a while to settle on. I thought about it for days, then decided on a rectangular door over a curved door. The curved door seemed above my skill range, if I'm being honest. These pieces were cut to a 1/2 inch and installed for looks mostly. I didn't want the porch to be bare wood and rustic, but some wooden detail was desired. Now that the frame was done, I had to fish the marker light wire through. I added these treated angled pieces to the front as an attachment point for the aluminum and padded out the rear studs to match the plywood sidewall. I bought 2 25-foot rolls of aluminum. It's advertised as RV roof aluminum. I used it for the sidewalls too. I checked into other aluminum options, but they were way too far outside of my budget. These 2 rolls alone were $1,600. This 2-inch bend is the top side and will rest on the top of the framed walls. So I've attached the giant piece of aluminum with 2 screws. These 2 feet kept the aluminum from bending against the garage floor. This is why I can't build a full-size trailer inside the garage. The doors and ceiling are just too low. This sheet barely fits out the door. Sure would be nice to have a taller garage. If you noticed Brandy dragging that wood there, she was going to have our baby boy in a couple days. That framing wasn't all that heavy and she didn't mind helping. During this 5-month build, I slept every other night and spent those nights awake editing this video as I went. It's been exhausting and long. But I'm a proud papa again to a little baby boy, and it's worth it. I set about cutting the curves and bending their edges. I chose to crimp the curves instead of dovetail cut them, as the crimp makes the curve and allows an unbroken edge for the sealant to adhere to. Before installing the roof aluminum, I cut out the door and windows to allow some light for working. Tugging the aluminum over the roof was way tougher than this video makes it look. It also took a really long time with a ton of running back and forth. My hands and forearms were toast. I cut it mostly to size, leaving an inch on either side. At this time I thought I might bend an inch over, but that's kinda impossible with the curves, and crimping it would look terrible. I ended up cutting it flush. This footage comes from a week-long test where I put the Sika adhesive on the wood and aluminum to see how it would do. It did so well, I decided to adhere the aluminum to the wood with it. It wouldn't detach without a chisel from either the wood or the aluminum. It's also extremely flexible. Before any aluminum to wood attachment was made, the aluminum was cleaned with alcohol and sanded with 80 grit sandpaper to give the adhesive a bit more to grab onto. Each window and door opening was another opportunity to supplement the adhesive with nails and screws. I definitely did use a ton of adhesive. Literally each stud was adhered to up to 3 times against the aluminum and on either side. Here I'm putting nails in the cross members where the aluminum overlapped them. The roof was slid into place after cleaning. This application of adhesive ran the length of the roof line and front wall. It wasn't meant to seal the corner, it was only meant to adhere the overlapping ends of the aluminum. The sealant would be applied later. The tape stayed on there for more than a week as that dried. I began bending the aluminum for the window sills. At first, I kept the vertical sill long and thought I'd bend it in, but when I tried, it more messed up the edge rather than bent well. So I cut the vertical sides flush to the wood and tried something else. Only in the door jamb did I keep the aluminum all the way around.
So once I had all the window openings cut to where I wanted, I did leave 3/8 of an inch of an overlap for the top part of the jamb.
I meant to say sill. Nails were used here also to attach the aluminum. And each piece of each window frame and sill began as one of these PVC boards that I cut to size and shape, like this piece for the kitchen windowsill.
First cut these to 1/2 inch and left them at 3/4 tall. And I went and put a channel in all of them.
All of the glass was custom cut to size as needed. The only one I didn't cut was the front window, which was done by a local company and was thicker than the rest. Each window, whether a stationary window or moving window, was made this way. I used a flexible and clear waterproof sealant to hold these windows together. For each top window, I completely coated the window opening in the polyurethane adhesive before installing them. If water should get in there, it will meet the poly and not the wood. Later, I sealed these windows far more thoroughly. The aluminum was cut to shape and the rear was finally glued down. I wish I had left it a little bit longer. The door jamb was a tough area to figure out. I left all the aluminum in the jamb that I could and added some to places that could use a little extra protection. That and extra adhesive. I knew I wanted to make a custom piece of trim to cover the whole thing, so I was confident it would be fine. The custom trim would be easy to seal after all. You're going to see me use heat to bend a lot of this PVC board. It's a great product in that it is sturdy enough for trim, not structural, but it responds great to heat bending. It made a lot of this project possible. I've been using it on small projects for years. This is Brandy's hair dryer. Later, I bought a heat gun. Now that I had a jamb, I needed a door. It wasn't a complex build, but I did incorporate square aluminum tube on each side to keep it from warping. It was a more expensive way of building a door, yet came with better peace of mind. I made these little brackets to help attach the aluminum to the wood. As with all aluminum on this build, it was first sanded, then cleaned with alcohol before attaching it to the door. And that stayed clamped like that for a week. This 1/4 inch bend that I'm doing here will eventually have a piece of trim that covers its edge against the wood. And that dried for a week. Before beginning the interior work, I installed 4 of these brackets to connect the frame to the trailer with bolts. I drilled all the holes for the wiring for both the AC and DC circuits. This camper is my first to include solar, and this wire is the only penetration through the roof. Keeping it that way makes for an easy sealing situation and a good deterrence against leaks. After I wired it, I pulled them out, marked them, and set them aside to insulate the interior. Of course, I had to cut in the marker light locations at this time too. Wiring with the insulation in is a lot tougher, as the angle that the drill needs to be in is compromised by the insulation. I installed 1-inch insulation everywhere and diligently sprayed each and every tiny crack with expanding foam insulation after putting the wires back in. There wasn't much to the paneling besides a lot of work. It's 1/4 inch plywood secured with adhesive and nails. Now that the paneling was in, I could build and install the furniture and cabinets. Here's the kitchen base cabinet. Since the water tank and plumbing will be here, I sealed the floor with wood glue. In my last build video, I showed how this brand is waterproof when dry. Here's the basic couch framing and installation. With the 2 major pieces in, I could lay the floor. I made this floor to look like hardwood without the weight. It was cut from the same leftover 1/4 inch plywood that's on the walls. I gave it a soft sanded edge before installing. I used wood glue to attach it to the floor and supplemented that with nails. A coat of pre-stained wood conditioner was applied, and then I got on to staining it. For staining, I started with an extremely light color, then darkened with cherry until I had what I wanted. This was an experiment that turned out better than expected.
Not bad. Not bad. Get a little bit more. Oh yeah, that's about the color I want right there.
When that dried, I applied 3 coats of polyurethane. Now that the adhesive was good and cured, I could add this Sikaflex 521. This product has been highly recommended to me by many longtime RVers. This and Sikaflex 221. It's a sealant and adhesive. I've used the 221 for a few years now with great results, and this is my first time using the 521. It's ultimately what I'll seal this entire camper with, and different than the 221 in that it's UV resistant. By far and away, it's the most expensive tube of anything on this build at $30 each, and maybe I bought 5 of them for this build. I applied it to each seam on both sides of the camper in 2 layers. The first to get in there deep, and the second to make it pretty and smooth. I understand that this way of doing it will cause a few to be turned off. For me, I'm going to need to see it come apart to believe it won't work. This stuff is incredibly durable and grabby, and the supplemental nails and screws will keep the aluminum from moving around. All this has to do is seal and handle a bit of natural flex, what it should do easily. In a recent Airstream documentary, I saw them using Sikaflex to seal their campers, and you can't beat that.
So I cleaned the whole thing with acetone and then a diluted simple green, and sanded all the little imperfections and stuff. Okay, so there's 3 coats on the front and 3 coats on the side, and it looks a little, oh man, it looks spray painty. I can't lie, the front I did a lot better job on, the side I did a little bit bad job.
Now painting is where I really wish I had better space and equipment. I thought I could spray paint this, but with the wind and general lack of experience spray painting, it turned out horrible. So let's scratch that, and let me share that I ended up roll painting it with a foam roller and got surprisingly good results. Now I went back inside to continue the build out. I'm mounting a 6,000 BTU AC here. Again, some of you guys are not going to like this, but I haven't been convinced yet that I need a heavy and super expensive roof AC in my camping experiences. This is rated for a room far larger than 6 by 9 feet, and should be adequate for the type of camping our family does. We won't spend much time in here during the day. If for some reason it can't do the job, I'll accept defeat and mount a larger roof unit. As of right now, it doesn't make sense to spend $800 to solve a $150 problem. Same with the heating on this build. We're going to use a plug-in electric heater and not solve a $30 problem with $300. It doesn't make financial or space-saving sense. Here I'm building the booth. Using 3/4 and 1/2 inch plywood, I began with the basic seats and let the idea of an expandable booth come to me. I wanted this camper to be able to carry a dirt bike, and a full-size booth would have been in the way. There had to be a way to make it both a 2-person and a 4-person booth while looking decent and working well. My brother and I have been racing dirt bikes since the 90s, and I thought it would be so neat to build a camper that I can take to the track, race, and camp out with our friends. On the track, I used to be the hare, now I'm the tortoise. And this booth, to fit that bike in there, would also have to expand lengthwise into a bed to allow me at 6'1" to sleep. So here's what I came up with. Given the inspiration of the 50s for this build, there is no way I'd build any other dining furniture than a booth. I'd build the table much later when the idea came. Now I went for the cabinets with another harebrained idea and a need to use some of this leftover aluminum. Please pardon a few blurry shots. My camera fell over multiple times during this build, and I did my best to duct tape it back together, literally. It's got a cracked viewfinder and display screen, and I'm barely getting by with it. Here I went ahead and mounted the ceiling lights as I needed some light to work on the cabinets. And this junction box needed installed before I faced the cabinets with aluminum. It was just easier that way. These nails will later be covered with fancy chrome molding. I know there will be some concern of my lack of using gloves, and I'm sorry to create the bother. I have done construction on and off for most of my adult life, with HVAC work being the main part. Years of installing sheet metal without gloves. You get very used to it after a while, but I did cut the living daylights out of my finger using that pocket hole bit when framing. It was my first time ever using a pocket hole jig. A very basic idea for those cabinets were that they flow into the wall and back out again, keeping a curve of the 50s. At this time I didn't know how I'd do the doors, so I let that come to me as well. Here I'm attaching some piano hinges to make a fold-out bed from the front of the couch. It'll be 30 inches wide, and I ended up using 3/4 inch plywood instead of 1/2 inch like you see here. Now that the booth was in, I could make an AC cabinet. I cut a hole in the countertop here to create a duct chase that will funnel cool air to the ceiling of the camper. This and a vented door will be installed later once my brain comes up with how to do it. Nearly all of this is building on the fly. While that dried, I went back to the porch to do more work. As I'm wiring in these marker lights, I just want to let you guys know that I will no longer use Scotch locks and have bought a heat gun to facilitate heat shrink connections. I sure did receive some negativity from that last video where I used the Scotch locks. This is the rear porch roof. It was finished with 3/4 inch trim to cover the gaps, caulked, and later painted. To finish off the leftover aluminum, I chose to side the rear porch with it. That entailed scoring and breaking it into 10-inch tall sections. When I had a bunch of those made, I began installing them. They were first sanded and cleaned with alcohol on the wall side, nailed in place, and stick adhesive was used generously. And I flashed each corner with a piece of angle made from the aluminum. These were given a 1-inch overlap. I used duct tape to hold these pieces together while they cured. Before I could start the next wall, I needed to cut in this vent for the AC. I wanted it to breathe well, and this vent will help a lot. Later I show how I make a custom cover for it. Now a rear door could be made. It needed a door jamb. So I set about making the rear door, which was pretty much exactly like the entry door without aluminum. So let's save some time here.
So we'll finish it off and put a window in it.
Here I'm making the rear screen door with a sandwich technique of sorts, where I first secure the screen down to the table, then glue it between the two pieces of treated lumber, then cut the screen away. This keeps it tight. I like to pivot the nail gun back and forth to keep the nails from popping out.
The screen door for captivity. Alright.
These triangular roof extensions were an afterthought and modification when I realized I should have left the roof aluminum longer and just cut it to look like this. There's absolutely no way I can build a perfect camper the first try, so I'll have mistakes. Like my buddy Dave says, I cut it 3 times and it's still too short. There's so much trial and error to this, if I included it all, the video would be a week long. This piece of plywood was forced into position. It put up a good fight. And this PVC trim was added. I left it a bit high on the rear to shed the water away from the door. The window screens were made the same way as the rear door. There are several different grades of window screen. This one claimed to be the toughest. Electrical began with a 30 amp plug wired to a 2-breaker panel. I installed a DC panel, and since this build includes solar, there's a solar charge controller added. I've never done one of those. I never recommend doing electrical work as I do it. I just show you how I get it to work. The battery is a 100 amp hour lithium, and a 2000 watt Renogy inverter accompanies it. When all was said and done, zip tied and wire stapled, it looked like this. I installed receptacles, 1 here, 2 in the kitchen area, 2 inside the base cabinet, 1 in the AC cabinet, and 1 on the rear porch. We have a 3500 watt generator that we're going to use primarily if we're not in a campground. A rear porch light and switch went in, the taillights were installed, and a dual switch was added for the interior lights and entry door porch light. I decided to build benches for the porch area, and I painted the AC black as to not draw attention to it. The benches will be built out of treated lumber and in a way to ventilate the AC. I fished the porch receptacle wire through and secured the top with screws. The bench over the AC will have a removable access panel, and the one on the opposite side will be totally removable to make room for the portable shower pan. Then I nailed up the wire. Here's the removable access panel with a hole allowed for the receptacle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, buddy. That's some water.
Plumbing began with installing the big stuff. There's a 19-gallon water tank and 4-gallon water heater. It's been suggested many times that I use a tankless, and I will one day, but I'm using this one as I already had it for a while and it's still brand new. All pressure lines were plumbed with PEX on this build thanks to recommendations from commenters. I appreciate it, guys. Here's the installation of the water pump and me testing the switch. Here I'm cutting the hole for the shower's hot water line, which I'll fish up behind the wall in this case. When I first got the idea for a shower, I thought I'd send it through the wall lower and then later change my mind to send it through the wall as high as possible. The only creative plumbing thing I did was cut down this 8-inch long sink drain, grind off the threads for the purpose of making a very short sink drain that allows room for both the sink to drop down into the countertop and the refrigerator height. A flexible drain pipe helped with the curve. Sometimes in life, you gotta make stuff work. And here's the water fill cap. I kept it on the interior as I didn't want it on the entry side of the camper's exterior. It's super easy to get to it through the door. It finally came to me how I was going to do the upper cabinet doors. I wanted to keep them as seamless looking as possible. So here I go, scoring and breaking each opening, cutting them with snips made for an unwanted serrated edge. And here's how I covered each 1/4-inch door panel with aluminum. This worked way better than expected. While those dried, I made some base cabinet doors. And while those dried, I made a vented AC cabinet door using a decorative screen. The AC is remote controlled, and the remote works through this screen door without having to open it, so it's super convenient. The doors were drying and I got started on the fenders. The idea for giant flowing fenders was one from the start. Some of you may have noticed how I let the aluminum sidewall panels drop down more in the rear. That was for this moment where I used this galvanized steel sheet to create the fenders. In order to be painted, it had to be cleaned, etched with an acid solution, and rinsed thoroughly with water. I learned this technique when building and sheeting my rocket camper with galvanized steel. I use it primarily for easy access and its affordable price. Once cut, I trace the pattern onto the other piece. This is the acid solution. Usually I'll let it sit on there for 20 or 30 minutes per the bottle's instructions. While that did its thing, I cut the aluminum, leaving enough to bend an edge for the fenders to attach. I also made some 90-degree catches to provide a place to screw the fender in along the sidewall. Where I could, I screwed them into the trailer frame or a stud, and where I couldn't, I used a pop rivet to attach them to the aluminum. A little dab of Sikaflex was used on each catch to help hold the fender while I screwed it down. Sikaflex is one of the very few things that will adhere to properly prepared galvanized metal. Two bolts were sent through the trailer's original fender supports, and I made some custom fender braces to help attach the fenders towards the rear. And I kind of free-handed this shape here to try to make it teardrop-ish. I thought it would look alright to complement the fender. I did my best to make these look fairly seamless. It sure would be nice to have the equipment to stretch metal into more complex curves like those seen from automobile manufacturers of years ago. I'm definitely inspired by fenders from the cars from the 40s and 50s. For other inspiration, I watch a lot of the Bossa Nova channel on YouTube as they go around to vintage trailer rallies. And the campers I'm truly interested in were built decades ago. I also love to watch rat rod rallies. They are so creative. During the fender adhesive curing, I stepped back to the porch work to get it ready for paint. It went through my mind many times to leave the wood bare or paint it. Ultimately, I had to remind myself that I'm not building a rustic camper this time. Paint was the right move. Now, it would have been easier to sand the deck in wood initially, but the decision wasn't made until the time had come to do the work. This wood trim, I thought, would keep the exterior from looking plain. As you see me mark it out here, I wish I would have just clear gloss varnished it and not stained it. I personally like the light color, but in the moment the right thing to do felt like staining it. Let me know what you guys think. Once cut, all the pieces were sanded, cleaned with denatured alcohol, stained, then varnished with Total Boat clear gloss halcyon varnish. A couple chalk lines helped to keep them straight, and I prepped the aluminum with coarse grit sanding and cleaning. I definitely thought about just using adhesive for this trim, but I went with nails out of precaution. I think either way probably would have worked. Now back inside for finishing work. There was a good bit of trim and paint. Watching me paint is more boring than watching it dry. I'm going to shorten this section. I did choose teal and white after looking at dozens of 50s kitchens and diners and settling on a lot of teal with red accents and white to keep it clean and open looking. I didn't set out to make this thing look like a 50s diner inside. That slowly came as I built, and I found it more and more fun the more 50s diner-esque it became. I absolutely love it now and can't wait to take it camping. For the exterior window trim, I cut down some PVC board to 1.5 inches wide by 1/4 inch thick. The heat gun helped me bend it into place, and I made a couple wooden jigs for the workbench to get an ideal bend. I dabbed the adhesive on here knowing that later I would seal it fully. For the opening window sills, I first sanded them and cleaned them with alcohol, as the PVC board has a nice finished layer that doesn't really like adhesives. Anywhere I added another piece of trim to it was prepped to accept the adhesive. For the entry door, I made these curved bits of trim and tried to keep with the style of the window cutout more than I did with the regular interior window trim. The entry door needed a doorstop, so I made one out of wood for a bit of a change. Here I'm adding decorative wooden tile out of 1/4 inch plywood. We're getting down to the finishing touches. That needed painted, and I finally installed the duct. Before painting the interior trim, each edge was caulked. Back to these cabinet doors. I decided to add a piece of 3/4 inch board for the hinge to attach to. That would allow most of the hinge to be hidden in the cabinet, keeping with the seamless look. This tiny pocket had to be cut to allow for the hinge. The knobs will come later once I think of how to do them. I went to finishing the base cabinet. Some quarter round was later installed at the base cabinet and all the way around the floor. This is a fold-away bed support being mounted with a piano hinge. It will work along with another hinge-mounted support for this portion of the bed.
Push that down.
The expandable booth finally received tabletops cut from 3/4 inch plywood. One will travel here and one will travel on the table legs. For the legs of the table, I put my creative hat on and came up with this triangular design. This table will both support the table in the eating position and was cut to the correct height to be laid on its side, and support a tabletop when it's in the bed configuration. This will make more sense when I demonstrate it later. This video is a little longer than my last one, and I figured some extra footage couldn't hurt, as it takes me months to build a camper and produce a video. I sheeted all table and countertops with galvanized steel. From looking at photos of the 50s, steel counters seemed popular. These aren't the greatest looking things, but I couldn't afford the more high quality sheet material at this point. It was my night to watch the kids, so we did Daddy's crafts. The shower hose got popped through. I put showers in these campers because I lived in a 4x8 camper for 10 months one time, and if you don't keep yourself clean, they will stink quick. I found out the hard way. And we're going to use this portable shower pan, and we could just move our gray water tank under it. I got super lucky to find one that was exactly the measurement of the rear deck. I don't mind roughing it, but we're going to keep this thing smelling decent the best we can. As for the cushions, I thought they'd be red, but they turned out this color, thank God. And I don't know how to sew, so I glued them together with this clear Gorilla Glue and have done it for years with great results. So all cushions were made like this. I began adding the corner molding at this point, PVC again. The heat gun made short work of the bending, and I first applied adhesive to the corner, and when that cured, I went back and sealed each edge with Sikaflex 521. To me, this is a super easy way to inspect for leaks. It's a clean line to check, doesn't take long to look at, and if it shows signs of coming apart, I can add more or make further adjustments as needed. I definitely flirted with the idea of no corner molding for even a sleeker look, but thought it was better protected like this. Nails were used in the rear porch area. No nails were used in the molding anywhere else. I applied it slow and even, then used a cup of soapy water to wet my finger and drag across for a smooth seam. And then I finished sealing the windows and doors and anything else. Here I'm making somewhat of a teardrop shaped AC vent. It's aluminum, and I scored the lines with a razor, slowly working at them until they broke open, then bent each fin with pliers until acceptable. Making this took a few hours. Actually, making any small part of this camper takes a long time. Most pieces take longer than it takes to watch this video. This was a solid 5-month project and went over by a month and a half of what I expected. I attached it to PVC trim and made this pass-through for water. It can either flow through to the drain pan or right back out. Any leftover sharp edge received edge molding, including here at the cabinets and the fenders outside. Chrome trim was used on the AC cabinet and booth as well. When the idea came of how to do the knobs, I made them as sleek and simple as possible out of thin steel just by angling them and grinding and sanding them smooth. They accompanied magnetic catches. I like that you can barely see them, but I've already noted mixed impressions. I sealed the corners on the porch with a clear sealant, and dining table magnets were installed to hold everything together while traveling and making it fairly easy to detach and reconfigure the booth. This little wooden block held 2 magnets for the base cabinet doors. The solar panel was one of the last things to go on. It's a 200 watt unit. I used double-sided mounting tape after checking a how-to video. The tape was spaced to match the roof joist. It's on the roof a bit crooked, but there's plenty of room for 2 more panels if ever needed. I should have put that on after I pulled it out. I definitely would have gotten it on straight then. There was limited room up there. All 3 doors received their respective knob or handle, and the 2 living area doors received weather stripping. I made a drain for the water tank and installed it. We're going to use a 15-gallon portable gray water tank and a portable toilet. We've had them for a while and used them on our other camper. I didn't see a real reason to add the weight of built-in equipment on this one. A couple final finishing touches. I cut in a grill for the AC. Next year I'll test it on a hot day, and if enough air doesn't make it up there, I'll add a diffuser to force more air up. I installed a water shield for these receptacles. The one is GFCI for the water heater, and the other is non-GFCI for the fridge circuit. Folks said you don't want to put your fridge on a GFCI in case it trips and spoils the food. And this simple wooden shelf was added for storage. As I was installing this final piece of trim, my camera battery died, and it seemed fitting that I get on to showing you the final result. Folks, thank you so much for watching this long. Most of my viewers are over 55 years old. That's 23% of you guys, and 22% are over 65 with almost no youth watching these builds. I dedicate this build to any of my viewers who lived through the 50s and still love that era. I really wish I could have experienced that time in America. And I'd really love it if you'd leave a comment telling me what you liked about the 50s. So we pulled it out of its cubby where it's been sitting for 5 months and took it for a 100-mile test ride. I immediately liked the way it looked far more than in the shade of the carport. The first stop was at the local metal recycler to weigh it. It was 1,920 pounds dry. If you like this build, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. I want to keep bringing you guys innovative and creative camper builds. Also, please consider sharing the video as it's free and each view ultimately powers my ability to do this. Thank you so much for the support. I'll take a rest now and let you enjoy the final result. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next creative camper build.